Okay, and we are recording. So I'm Carol Dekkers with the Heart of Agile here in St. Petersburg, Florida, and I'd like to welcome everybody to this session that is part of the Agile 20 Reflect.org festival. So as is kind of the norm, we talk about anything and everything to do with Heart of Agile, anything to do with collaboration or deliver or reflect or improve, or anything you just feel like is on your mind. Is there, I have a couple of ideas, but if anybody has anything compelling you'd like to talk about, feel free.
I'm just going to jump in here and say that I'm getting a lot of background echo here. I actually did a little exercise for some clients I was working with. I used one of the online animation platforms to make an animation history of Agile. And it was always good to go back and kind of remind ourselves kind of who was involved and what it was. And of course, I started with Francis Bacon, since he's the father of empiricism, and then jumped forward to Schuhart and Deming. And then very quickly we came into, all the work that was being done in the 80s and 90s. And, I'm just amazed at the impact that a relatively small number of people had, on a whole industry. Those 17 people in Snowbird, just had such an incredible outsize among others who couldn't make that meeting. And looking, I'm just, I'm amazed with Alistair and a lot of other people who contributed. I should say that many of the things that I have gone back and read, from the days are still every bit as applicable today as they were then.
I agree. The one of the things that's kind of neat about this Agile 20 Reflect Festival is that every single event is free. It's from all over the world. We've got people from Nigeria and Kenya and all over Europe participating. And then the Australians have their sessions, and those are, kind of off times for some of us. And it's interesting because you get some just luminaries over the last 20 years who have joined in on the Agile movement and really made a difference. And it actually came up, that's interesting that you'd mentioned that, Barry, it's come up numerous times on different events. Why were there not women involved? Why was it these 17 men? How did it come together? Did they have any idea whether their 3-day snowbird, half skiing, half cigars, half sitting around, did they have any idea of the impact that it would have on the world? And the answer was pretty much no. We had no particular idea that that would happen. And so people talk about, well, what's next? Is there going to be Agile 2.0? Is there going to be another manifesto? Should there be an inclusionary thing? What's going to be next? And the jury's kind of out on that. I'm going to actually ping Alistair right now and see if he's around, because sometimes he forgets about the Wednesday coffee corner. But what does everybody else think? What do you think, that there should be an Agile 2.0? What have you seen in your experience? What's next?
Well, one of the things that I was surprised to be reminded of is that our direct application of lean, specifically lean methods and Kanban are still pretty recent. That those were recent innovations after the initial Agile conference. So I feel like, as an industry, we still are, plumbing a lot of the history to remind ourselves how to apply these principles. So in a sense, I think that's the continuation of, what Agile is continuing to leverage all these methods that we know are available to us.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Barry, because I saw someone put something on LinkedIn about Kanban and Toyota. So that goes a little bit far back, I think, than 20 years, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you look at the all the things that we inherited from the Toyota production system, it's humbling. It really is. But those things, Toyota is still using those things today. You can find YouTubes, made within the last year that show what Kaizen looks like on a modern Toyota factory floor, that employees are still finding ways to make things a little better every day. And it's remarkable.
I don't think that there's going to be really an Agile 2.0 because it has been kind of going for a bit now. I think probably what's going to happen more is that people have companies have finally started waking up to the fact that Agile is not something that you implement, number one. And number two, it's not just something that fits across everyone. I think that there's a whole ecosystem of methodologies, frameworks, tools, lenses out there, and people are starting to realize that you have to use them applicable to your own unique context. It's a slow process, but I think that that's kind of the next stage for a lot of coaches, is understanding that, this is an ecosystem, really. It's an ecosystemic approach. Agile is great, but I mean, talking to some of the clients I've talked to recently, they literally work with process engineering, that they have to work in a waterfall phased fashion. So if you go in and say, well, we have to be Agile, that's going to cause them problems in terms of a process. But Agile, like I asked Alistair a while ago, is Agile the same as agility? Yes, it is, because they're the same concept, right? So as opposed to Agile as a brand, which was never the intent of the manifesto, it was a guide, right? And things evolve over time. So I think we are at a point where enough people are starting to realize there's an evolution and the landscape's changing enough that, I think it's maturing and growing. I don't think it's going to be a 2.0. I don't think Agile's iterative. I think it evolves. Right.
I think another kind of angle that probably may get overlooked in thinking for the roadmap for Agile 2.0, if there ever is one, is the whole financial aspect. Because I think back then it may have just been a bunch of friends or got together and thought, okay, we're going to do good for the world and let's come up with a manifesto. I mean, just try getting these people together now and saying, let's come up with it, right? Everyone has their own vested interest, right, to make money and where the scaling methodology or where this or where that, right? I mean, I just see that just as being like the United Nations coming together and coming to one resolution. Nobody will ever do that, right? But that's just my kind of thought on it from that perspective.
Thank God for all that naive enthusiasm back in the old days.
Well, I haven't been on an Agile project. I've been in software development forever. I've done consulting forever, but I have not actually worked on an Agile project where you have to do the daily stand up and everything else. I've taken all the Scrum training. But one thing that just hits me all the time is that I still think the elephant in the room is communication between technical and non-technical people, between whether it's software development and doctors and nurses who all have their own language. I think the Agile was intended to get rid of some of the overhead that software developers and their bosses put in place that said, you must do it this way. And I still think that there's problems because I hear people saying, I had to take SAFe training and there's all this terminology and we have all these protocols and we have to do this and this and this, and then we have to do it in this order and it doesn't make sense. And I think, well, that's what Agile was supposed to get rid of. We were supposed to be talking, directly to each other and working directly with each other and getting rid of all this overhead, non-value added stuff. And I think in some cases, Agile has become more complicated. And that's exactly where Alistair came back and said, hang on, let's boil this down to 4 things again. We just seem to keep building and building and building. And so let's get rid of this and let's go back to the basics. Am I just out to lunch on that?
Not at all.
No.
Now, and I've, when I consolidate. We had 3 methodologies and consolidated into one, and it didn't say whether it was waterfall, agile, whatever. I just said it's not one size fits all.
No.
And the success of your project or effort or whatever are the people. Like I would sit down with a team, say who are the people here involved. I said, you're going to be successful. You have the right people and they're working together. Don't get hung up on terminology.
Yeah.
Just do what works best for you. Trial and error.
Yeah, I mean, so kind of to the original point, Carol, you kind of mentioned SAFe in there, right? So sometimes you kind of have to go back and look at historically where all these things came from. And my understanding is that some of the founders of the SAFe, they were heavily into UML and those type of things, highly rigid process type of frameworks. And so when this whole Agile bandwagon started to take, momentum, they said, okay, well, we're out of business. What should we do? So a lot of that kind of framework I still see in that scaling. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect is that you got to look at it from, the word I just said, scaling perspective. So if we're dealing with a singular team, right, 10 people or 20 people, right, okay, so we can do it one way. But if you're like, say, my current client, Ford Motor Company, right? So you have thousands and thousands, and like BP, Chris, like yourself, right? And so you got to have some kind of direction given. You can't just let everything just happen organically and say it's just going to come together. It's just not going to happen, right? In those type of environments. So like it's horses for courses. So I think I agree. Paul, with your comment, right, that let it happen, but they also I've been at both extremes. So I've kind of been like where it's like, okay, just let things happen, and why do we need story points? It's a commitment, right? So if the team is committing, why do we need story points, right? And then I've been on the other extreme as well, because I said no, I think maybe you do need story points because it's right. Instilling some kind of a way of doing things there. So anyway, just a couple of comments there.
Update from Alistair. He just WhatsApped me and said he's on his way driving up to Snowbird right now. He has sons that live in Salt Lake City, so he flew out there last weekend and is actually driving up to Snowbird right now. So he sends his best wishes and says, hope this is a great session. He's sorry he can't be here. Hey,
I just
Paul.
wanted I was just going to add on to what Max was saying there. So it's interesting because, and what Paul was saying, I think it's very easy to see things like Agile as a destination rather than a journey, right? So when you think about it, Agile really, or agility, is really only one side of the coin. And you've also got things like resilience, because, as Max said, you can't just do things without having some kind of direction outside very specific circumstances. As usual, I'm not going to start going on about complexity theory and Knevin and whatever, but you do kind of need a direction, but you also need to have the agility and resilience to be able to change your path should that be applicable. And of course, with a lot of methodologies, you've got this kind of slightly religious or cultish aspect that always happens with everything, because that's how humans work. So for example, Dan North has a Swarm, scaling without a religious methodology. So it doesn't just use one way of doing it, like SAFe or like whatever. So I think that's an important thing to look at. I mean, for me, when I talk about Agile or agility, I say, what does it really mean? There are 3 parts to it, really. Can you change? Can you react, and can you repurpose what you already have? Realistically, that's what agility is made of. And twinned to that, you have resilience, where things may go wrong, right? Sometimes you literally cannot stop things going wrong. So you need the ability to kind of see where it might go wrong, maybe. If it does go wrong, recover quickly, and hopefully exploit that new paradigm. And they feed into each other in a really kind of interesting kind of dual way. So just thought that was worth mentioning.
Guys, I'm gonna have to drop off in like 1 minute. Sorry, I got a call. I did want to join at least initially, right? I was hoping it will get canceled, but it doesn't look like it's gonna get canceled. So no, actually. And just my final point, Chris, to yours. The other thing which I found through being at different organizations or clients is that their culture plays a really big role as well. You know, what is their culture, right? My culture, the people, you know, Ford is very different from my previous client, Deutsche Bank, right? It's totally different culture. And so what could work there may not work at Ford Motor Company because, and that's a big kind of part of it that gets overlooked sometimes. But anyway, good luck, guys. Hopefully we'll talk next time.
Hi, Max.
Yeah.
I find it interesting too with my background's measurement, software measurement. I find it interesting that measurement is a issue in Agile. And I've been to a bunch of Agile conferences and people come up and they go, oh my gosh, measurement is horrible. We should not have estimates. Estimates just end up being deadlines. Those are awful. We shouldn't be measuring things and they don't like our measures and we throw measures out and that's not good enough. And I look at it and think, okay, so we've got two elephants in the room. One is management requires measures to prove that they're getting value. And then the communication. And I think they've improved with Agile, but I think there's still issues. What do you think?
Metrics or measurement, there's two slightly different things, but measurement's required to understand progress. I think it depends what are you measuring, not are you measuring. I think that's probably, you know, in some ways more important.
And why you're measuring.
And why you are measuring, exactly, Dominique, you know, why? Everyone should be asking why, the 5 whys, whatever. Why is really important as well, but also, you know, management do tend to focus on metrics over the outcomes those metrics are there to support a lot of the time. It's very easy. Let's not even talk about velocity of story points and all that kind of stuff, because that's a very good example. So a good thing to measure are things like vectors, you know, the movement that you're taking over time, especially in agile transformations, which are not quick. So, yeah, what and why and how, not are.
Just start by the why, and then you can get the what and how.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you need some kind of measurement if you want to learn.
An interesting thing.
And Agile is by learning, so if you have no measure, it's going to be difficult to learn and to progress.
Agreed. I mean, one thing that, so Rob England, who worked with me on the 3D Kinevin stuff, one thing that he was saying a little while ago was he doesn't believe that individuals should be measured for performance at all, because that kind of supposes that they're like components within a system. The team that they're part of should be measured for their
Right.
input and their performance. So it's the outcomes and the output of the team, not each individual.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the team should measure itself rather than be measured.
Yes.
Well, and
exactly.
you need to make
Awesome.
sure that if you're going to measure somebody or measure a team or measure something, you have to give them the opportunity to succeed. And I always remember, you know, performance reviews, people do performance reviews and say you need to be at this level next year. And then they don't give you the capability or the tools to be able to get there. So I think anytime you have any sort of team measures, no matter what it is, you need to be able to, if you're going to reward or penalize a team for doing certain goals or achieving certain goals, you need to be able to allow them to succeed and give them every opportunity to get that success. And I think a lot of times we put barriers in the way. We have reward systems that are contrary to the things that we want them to measure. And we end up, what one of my clients called was chasing the green box. If they could stay in a green box area, they'd be under the radar. And I think that still happens with Agile.
Yeah.
And I think that's an issue
Sorry,
with,
Barry, go on.
with so many aspects of measurement. I mean, the growth I'm hoping to see in agile concepts are, you know, adoption of humanistic principles that were really what got us started more broadly into management in general. And a lot of people, you know, there's a lot of work in that direction. One of my favorite books the last few years has been Buckingham and Goodall's 9 Lies About Work, because it's a delight. And what's, you know, what I value about it so much is all of their assertions are based on, you know, surveys that they've been doing of tens of thousands of people over years and years. Yet it aligns so closely with the fundamental agile principles that we adopt, you know, that are really people first. And one of the things that they sort of eviscerate is the idea that people can rate other people and do it successfully. In fact, there's been a great deal of research that all that does is tell you about the biases of the person doing the rating. It doesn't actually give you information about the person being rated.
But it also promotes competition as opposed to collaboration. And what I was going to say, linked on to what Carol was saying, all human systems, all systems, I think the metric currently accepted is you have a maximum of about 9 months before humans have learned to game the system, whatever they're in. And I remember this from every company I've ever submitted expenses to. You need to put in the tax for the hotel, you need to put in the nights, you need to put in all the bits. But because it's not a flexible system, just take the total and split it into the number of nights and put that in instead. And I'm like, what is the point of even tracking this if it's not going to be? So you learn to game it just to get through, to be able to do your job or avoid it or whatever. So, you know, what you end up tracking and the performance and putting this onto other people, it's very easy for people to, it's like computer games. You're chasing a score, but people learn to use the game mechanics to get the score, not
People
achieve
do
it just through playing normally. It's how it works. So
it sounds like the reward systems are actually gamification of work in a way.
Yeah. And, you know, good games, good rewards are those where your effort to game the system actually helps the system improve. You know, like if you want a team to be more effective, you know, you allow them to game in a way that controlling WIP and making smaller stories to go through in a better flow system, you know, gets them more points. If you can do that, that's great. Game away.
Right.
but look at ecosystems, right? The ecosystem benefits from everything within the ecosystem succeeding at what it's doing. And that's for the success of the whole ecosystem. If you have one thing within an ecosystem, I'm looking at you, humanity, that just does something for its own benefit and ignores the rest of the ecosystem, then in the end, it's quite self-destructive. And a lot of companies go down that route, as well as one species that I'm part of at the moment, allegedly.
We are our own global tragedy of the commons right now, right? Because of all these untaxed costs or unrealized costs that we've put on ourselves. And I think companies do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're burning our people out or we're building a toxic culture. You know, there's no score for that, so we don't need to worry about that.
Yeah.
What do you think, Mark?
Let me unmute here. I'm new to the group, so I'm just taking it all in and learning. You know, my experiences of Agile. I mean, I've got medical software background and logistics with Ryder, who's close to the area you guys are in. But when I was at my Ryder days, we called that lean and the black belt methods, and it was kind of a collaborative, but agile in a sense. But the thing about agile that I've learned, it's hybrid. You know, like the gentleman said earlier, it's what works best for the team to meet the definition of done, not necessarily strict follow the step-by-step methodologies or ceremonies of Agile. The one big thing that's important when others talked about measurements is important, and it is. One way to get effective measurements on productivity is doing retrospect. And a lot of teams seem to not have the time for retrospect. And therefore they miss the opportunities of where they can improve and so forth, and their measurements would improve. But that's my input today. I like this group. I'm just looking to, learn more and provide more as it goes, as I break the ice. So thank you.
Well, glad you're here. This is good.
I'd be interested to hear more about, how your experience factors into, what you see going on today. I think, I think one of the challenges for us in being effective coaches is deciding where to find that balance. I mean, we want teams to be self-organizing. We want teams to do what works for them. But, depending on where people are, what their knowledge base is, what their experience is based, do they know yet how to self-organize? Can we help them avoid some of the things that we have pretty clear evidence don't work very well? And that's, like I'm in an interesting contrast now. I just finished working with a client for a long time who had done a successful Agile transformation 10 years ago, but they'd stopped investing in educating people and training them. So after a while, the people who had gotten the fervor and really learned and helped to optimize these systems, there's turnover, people leave, you lose the institutional memory, and they didn't reinvest. So, the last thing I did before leaving the client was help them rebuild a sort of targeted training program that they could start to put their teams back through. To remind themselves, like they say they do Kanban because they have a Kanban board, but in fact, not a single team there was following basic principles of Kanban. They had just stopped practicing and stopped learning, and so the saw got very rusty. So, even though they'd been in our in our area, in the Seattle area, they were considered a leader, but if you don't keep investing, you lose that, and you lose that, the culture sort of sinks back down. So in that case, it was kind of trying to reinvigorate something they'd had in the past. Now I switched over to another very large retailer client, the big IT department, where no one has ever done anything Agile before. And so it's a whole different, we're starting teams up from scratch, but it's a whole different kind of flavor of how you need to help people think about what they do. So none of these teams could possibly self-organize themselves into something Agile because they just have no reference, no context for what that might look like. So there's where, it's really helpful to have, in this case, Scrum as, okay, we're going to start with some rules. Try this for a while until you kind of get your wheels under you, and then figure out what you want to change and improve. But you have to have some context to know where to start.
Well, I think that's interesting. Oh, Tori, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think from like my perspective, because I do a lot of work with like transformation. And so like what I find is the vast majority of my time is really like management consultant. It's not actually on like the Agile side. I think oftentimes we talk as if like Agile is like the goal, right? And it's not. Like no one cares about Agile, right? It's not the goal. The goal are like whatever the business outcomes, right, are. And so if you can begin to frame conversations around whatever those outcomes are, then the measurement of how do we know we achieve those things becomes a lot easier, and you can really influence systematic change, right? Because a lot of the work that I find is it's really organizational change management, leadership development, organizational redesign. And so sometimes we kind of, spin our wheels lost in these self-organizing, this is my point of view, Agile conversations. And those things are not really the goal, right? I think what I find is like when I go work with like middle managers, senior leaders, even though they're saying, hey, I want to go through an Agile transformation, there's a couple of things I realized to be true. One is there's no clear definition of what that means. Is it means you want to stall, is it a delivery transformation, right? Is it a business true end-to-end business transformation? That definition is very like rocky. And the second thing that I would say is that, oftentimes they don't really, they don't necessarily understand their role in agile transformation, whether it be create psychological safety, develop lean team structures, develop leaders who can lead others. And I think that like what I realize is you might talk to a senior leader and they might say, hey, I want to do agile transformation, right? The reality is they have a list of 15 things. This whole idea of going agile is probably number like 11 on their list of 15. And we've completely lost the point of view of like what those other top 11 things are, right? Because we're so focused on like how to be agile, not realizing we're there to really help them solve their business problems and challenges. And so we have to be okay with like, if that doesn't equal doing Scrum, or if that doesn't equal at the moment fixing certain things that we believe to be true based on all the courses we have, what I find is like that's where the best place to start to really impact systemic change. Otherwise, you're running around trying to like measure a bunch of things at a team program level, but at an enterprise organizational level, they care about bigger, more important things, right? And so you're just like, right? Like, I know a lot of people is running around doing these like assessments that like mean nothing, right? They mean nothing. If you look at the enterprise pressure, think about right now with COVID, right? These guys are trying to reimagine their business models, right? They have to like rethink their people strategy, but like we're running around talking about like self-organizing teams. Like it doesn't add up if I'm leading, right, a like $1 billion business. And so, the group I work with, like we try to really even rethink about our value propositions as coaches, understand we're there to really help the business evolve, right, and be resilient first. And then we can have the conversation about what does that really mean in terms of, okay, what matters? What do we need to measure? What does that mean in terms of leadership capabilities, right? Design. Then we can really have holistic systemic conversations. Otherwise, it's just me giving you a point of view of like, while average, story point size by cycle time like matters, right? That doesn't really have value. So that's what I find.
You're right. It's and I say the same thing with measurement, that agile and capability maturity model, or any model or any method or anything that you've got in measurement is, I always say this, if that becomes your end instead of the means to an end, which is build great products, if measurement becomes the goal, if agile becomes the goal, if better process maturity becomes the goal, then you fixate on that and you lose sight of what you were actually doing. And I think that if we focus on what do we want to do, we want to build great products the best way we can, efficiently, successfully, and to delight the customer. Okay, how do we do that? Oh, we can do it with agile processes. That'll work. We can do, we can support this by measuring and figuring out what we can improve. But if the means to the end becomes the end, we're in problems. Otherwise, I say to people, if you're measuring, why are you measuring? And they go, well, so that we can get these numbers on a scorecard. Well, okay, we've lost sight then. It should be so that we can support the business.
Yeah. I think when you drill into it, what you realize is the majority of the challenges are like organizational development, right? Design issues, organizational change management. It's not all of these like, these sticky things that we talk about, velocity and all this predictability, right? Like those things are cool, but like they're so far down the list. And so, at least that's what I find. And so I just want to offer, just, I guess, that candid observation, right? Really having a clear definition on the value proposition of like, what is the agile transformation? Is it really just is it more operational? You just want to streamline some processes? Are you really trying to rethink, reimagine how you deliver products? Because then you can really have those conversations. And like Larry Lee Tierney has a very cool motto. He was the guy that developed insights for Rally, well, I guess CA Agile Central now. And so he has this motto, I think it's like called like ODEM, like you're out, what outcomes are you trying to achieve? What decisions are you looking to make, right? What insights do you need to make those decisions to determine what you actually need to measure? And what I find is when we think about metrics, we don't really have that kind of mental model in mind. It's just like, oh, well, how do you want to improve, right? We come up with these like kind of ad hoc ways. If you really trace it back, you can really start using those metrics to actually drive systemic change, systematic behavior to actually achieve lasting, sustainable transformation. And so, at least in my work, those are the difficult conversations that I'm working with people on the ground to really make sure whatever we're doing, it makes sense, it's tangible, right? And it actually points back to directionally where we want to go with our business or whatever, right? It kind of might be. And so I'm not saying it's perfect, but what I find is like a lot of leaders and managers, to be honest, they don't really have the skill set, right? Like they're there, they might have a point of view that Agile is just like the Scrum Agile, safe stuff, whatever. They really don't know, right? Like, so you have to like develop, a lot of the work is really leadership development, right? It's organizational change. It's not the Agile, it's not like all this other stuff. That's the real work that I find when I go into organizations. So I'll pause there, stop the rant, but that's my observations.
You're so fortunate if you're actually able to get executives involved in the conversation, because one of the fundamental problems with our so-called transformations is it's something we have to do to the IT department, and mostly it's what we have to do to the developers in the IT department. No one else should need to change their behavior. We're going to keep doing all the things that we're doing already. We just need the IT people to be more efficient.
Yeah. No, I mean, full transparency. I mean, I run in that challenge too. I think, to be honest, right, it's truth telling, right? Like, when I work with people, I say, look, you have to be able to learn behavior. You have to be able to accept hard truths, and you have to be able to take hard stances. And so a lot of times I'm like, look, hey man, if we're not willing to do this, like you really like, maybe not your guy, right? Or sometimes it's just, I hate to say it, it's like allowing people to fail and letting them kind of experiment and iterate their way through it. And so I would say, look, you're in a situation, you can't even talk to executives, but they're like paying for this. Then that's red flag number one. Like, right, what are we really doing? What are we trying to achieve? How committed to you to change? Are you conscious of like what's required? Right? Like bare minimum, if you go in, you can't get those answers, that tells you like there's something that smells, something that's gimmicky about what you're trying to do, right? That tells you right there, right? Because, so I was kind of ending on this note, right? Because I talk to my wife about this all the time because she works in human capital. So we have this like debate all the time, right? It's kind of like, this whole like family thing, right? It's like, you go out here, you meet a lovely gal or guy, gal, right? You like each other, you fall in like, talk about the future, you put together the pieces, you figure out if this is where you want to invest your time. And then you kind of become a family and you kind of create that, right? You bring that vision to life, right? This is kind of the same thing. So like, if you go in these situations, like, oh, I want to bring in a coach or transform, but you have to fight to get their time and attention. I mean, right? Like, I like people who like me, right? Like it's simple. Okay, so you're supposed to dynamically change completely the way your organization views product development, everything else. And like, I have to fight to get on your calendar. No, man, these are your people, right? This is your business, right? Like, you're invested in it, you're not. And so what I find is these days when I'm trying to go work with certain clients, they can't give me that back. Look, man, I'm not the guy, because I don't want to spend my time spinning my cycles for like, maybe I'm not the guy, maybe there's someone else who's in a different place who they want to sign up for that task, but like, I'll kind of bow out. Simple, right? I like people like me, man. You know, but that's my point of view. I'm not sure that's perfect for everyone in their circumstance, but you know,
It reminds me of what Chris has said before, and we've had discussions about tribes, that, you know, how can we get the tribes to talk to each other? And whether, you know, and software development for years and years and years are the nerds of the world. You know, they're the ones that know the programming. They're the ones that can create this software and create these products. And I think a lot of times that it falls on the backs of the developers to have to figure it all out. And if you've got a dysfunctional relationship, it's both sides. But yet, for some reason, you know, whether it's medical device software, whether it's medical software or logistics or whatever it is, it by and large has fallen on the backs of the development teams to figure out how to figure out what the business needs.
Yeah, I find that sometimes when we talk about agile transformation, we look at it like you have to change all the business. But what I find is some point of views, it's like their version of good enough is install some practices, some consistency in their environment, get a little predictability or reliability going, and they're okay with that. That's their version of agile. And so what I find is up front, you have to kind of work with them however you need to in terms of creative workshops to get that point of view. So that way you can kind of adjust your approach to that, because what I see a lot of, like even my peers doing right locally in Atlanta, it's like you go in and they want you to do some coaching and you go with this point of view that like they want you to completely impact and change their entire business. And they're just okay with just having a couple of scrum teams who can be predictable. That's good enough for them. That's their version. So it's like, dude, like you're not going to go in and completely restructure how they view product management if that's not what they care about or that's not what they're willing to commit to. And so that's why I'm just kind of also just saying this, like it's very important that we understand, like, look, how do you see, what is your worldview? What are you looking to get out of this? What investments are you willing to make? What are you curious about? And start there. So that way, look, if it's just getting Scrum going, get them on a playbook so they have consistent practice and processes. Okay, cool. That's it, right? It is no, you're not going to go change and ask them to reconsider how they fund projects because that's not what they're interested in, right? And so I find a lot of people is like, we see transformation, they equate that to like changing all this stuff. And it's like, no, dude, they have like 5 Scrum teams. They just want, right? They just want to get some healthy patterns going and they want some good engineering processes. And that's good enough for them. That's their version of Agile. Okay, cool. Let me go help somebody else who might, right? Like, cool. So, to be truly self-organizing, you have to have a culture bred for that. You can't just go in and say, we should be self-organizing teams. You have to really shape culture and how people lead to really do that. Like, it's not just something you say, oh, Scrum is self-organizing and it's going to happen because you subscribe to Scrum. There's so much organizational development that has to happen for that to really truly happen. And I see people not really addressing that part of it. They just like, oh, well, you should be self-organizing and think it's going to like happen. Like,
well, and people take a Scrum course and then they say, okay, we've taken Scrum and that's it. Now we're Agile.
Guys, like this is human systems. This is human dynamics, like at its best. Like you have to address that. So I wish like more coaches would invest in understanding neuropsychology and like relationships and systems, like not all these practices and processes, because then you can actually start affecting true organizational dynamics. I'm not saying I'm the best at it, but I just.
Hey, I have a hard stop at 1:30, but I'm glad everybody's here. Mark, I'm glad you're here. Sheila, I know you've been silent. I don't know if you'd like to jump in and say anything.
If I start talking, I'll continue to talk. So,
Me too.
and right after I joined, I got a phone call, so I had to take that. But to me, if we're talking about metrics, I get concerned that you do want to know what success looks like at the outset. You want to know what you're aiming for, but you may deviate from it. But I do find that a lot of times the metrics drive everything. And another thing that concerns me is when you're doing estimating, the estimates get carved in stone really quickly. And I've been in organizations where if you find a better way to do it, but you're going to be a little late on one step, but ultimately it's going to save you a whole bunch of work later on, management panics. But that all goes back to most of the time today, people think of Agile as something that is only for systems and only for developers. And they think that, I've talked to people who've been told that they had 60 or 80 people that they were supposed to make them Agile in a couple of months. People don't see it as a journey. They see it as a very close by destination. They see it as something that's very focused within IT, and even within IT, only within certain parts of IT. And that's really not a way to be successful. But I've always looked at it as it's a toolkit that you need to pick and choose what makes sense for your process. And if you're using the same things over and over, and a lot of people who think that they know Agile, they think there's one right way to do it, and that's the only way. So they've kind of ossified it, which that's not Agile either.
Right. I think that's what Mark was saying, that it's a hybrid. And I think the recognition that it's a hybrid and that it's not a prescription is important.
Yeah, right quick, with everything Tori said, and I can relate to that, but a big part of a coach or a scrum master is getting the right people on the bus, that terminology, that theme in business. You getting the right team and you identify what people are best talented at. And it's still a hybrid, but then you learn which people do best at self-organizing based on the functions, that kind of thing. So you got to play a whole bunch of different angles that aren't necessarily in the Agile training. But it's, you're self-organizing when you have the right players on the team for the project, if that makes any sense. Not easily done all the time, depending on your talent pool, but with what we're in today with COVID and a remote working society, that you can find those talents that fit the needs of the project, and self-organizing is a big part of this.
I have a problem with the self-organizing, because a lot of times you need people with different skill sets to make up the team. And some people want to keep doing what they've been doing, and some people want to expand and do something different. But ultimately, there are certain tasks that have to be done, and you can't allow everybody to just pick and choose the things they want to do. And I think that whole idea of self-organizing, people get confused and think, oh, I don't have to do it if I don't want to.
Well, and maybe that, to what I was mentioning, finding the right talent to do the right piece of the project is something we can invest time in. In a remote world, we are self-organizing, working from home and so forth.
Right. Hey, I have to run. I hope everybody got something out of today, and I hope you come back next Wednesday. Have a great week. Congratulations, Chris, on your new endeavor, and hope to see everybody next week, same place, same time.
See you next week. Bye.
Thank you.